I think I probably will. I feel so exhilarated by what's been said, and I must say I am impressed by your mastery of the Ghanaian language. I knew you were a multilingual person, which is very unusual with Australian politicians, and of course you too have got an extraordinary range of interests, and I'm quite excited to think that we overlap on so many issues. Now, in fact, what I did, obsessive as I am, I've actually prepared two talks, one that I'm going to deliver tonight and a sort of a somewhat different one for the group this afternoon, and I've tentatively called it A Challenged Democracy, Wicked Problems and Political Failures. And I want to talk to you about the concept which some of you will know and some of you perhaps not familiar with, the concept of wicked problems. The term wicked problem was devised by two American sociologists called Riddell and Weber. And the term's been around for a long time, since 1973. But the idea of the wicked problem, if you look up Google and so on, or Wikipedia, you'll find a great deal about it. But the whole idea of the wicked problems are that they're problems which have an if I may read, incomplete, contradictory and changing requirements. And solutions to them are difficult to recognise because of complex interdependencies. I mean, a wicked problem might be, say, dealing with jihadism in the Middle East. You think, oh, well, we've got an objective. We want to eliminate the importance, the role. So if we move in, well, it's clear, if you drop enough bombs, you'll solve that problem. And then you have to say, well, hang on, yes, you perhaps destroy some individuals, but in fact, the counter-reaction that you produce somewhere else is more powerful and maybe more lasting and maybe transmitted somewhere else. So it's all very well to say, oh, well, we'll fix this problem, because if you do it, you may find you're then creating a whole series of other problems which you've never really contemplated and never really thought through. So their argument that it's the complex interdependencies between these issues, so that, as I say, by attempting to solve a problem which you think is simple, you may find it's not simple at all, it's extremely complex, and that there's a grave danger that what you've proposed will actually come back, if I can use technical language, and bite you on the bum. So now the existence of a discrepancy representing a wicked problem can be explained in numerous ways, and the choice of explanation determines the nature of the problem's resolution. So the whole idea of dealing with wicked problems, it's a challenge to the whole idea of linear thinking. Because you think, oh, there's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and in the end you reach your objective. But the whole point about so many of the things of the mental processes that we've got, we're used to linear thinking, we're used to the idea of reductionism. And in fact, you'd have to say that a great deal of the professional expertise that we have involves digging a pretty narrow but pretty deep furrow, where you say, well, I'm profoundly expert in this area, but I'm not particularly, well, I've got a range of the camera. It happens all the time. So that you get this extraordinary kind of interdependency. And I mentioned, when I started, I gave the example of the problem of jihad in the Middle East, and actually I don't want to spend too much time on that in isolation, but it's a very good illustration of the nature of the problem. As you know, we've just passed through the commemoration of Gallipoli, and if you remember those memorable words of Alan Bond after the America's Cup in 1983, where he said it was the greatest demonstrated victory since Gallipoli. Well, the problem is, you see, if you look at what's happened in the situation in the Middle East from 1915 through to 2015, that century period, with the sole exception, I'd say, and it's a bitterly contested exception, of the intervention that led to the creation of Israel, which still survives, you'd have to say, I cannot think of a single intervention by the West that's been successful. Everyone, absolutely without exception. I haven't brought the complete list, but if you want to circulate it, it's easy to do. I've got about 35 or 40 examples of where there's been an intervention, and each one of them has failed, and each one of them created a problem that's greater than the one, and it wasn't thought through at the time. And part of the difficulty is that you've got politicians who are operating perhaps in a very short political cycle, and who say, oh, well, look, we've got an election coming up, and we've really got to reach a satisfactory outcome of a particular problem, and we've got to do it, you know, within the next 12 months, 18 months, or whatever it is. But it doesn't involve a deep understanding to say, well, what do we understand about the nature of the process, what's going on? What do we understand about what's going on in people's heads? What do we understand about how you can come to terms and have any kind of rational discussion? I mean, if you think of the horror stories like the recent example, of course, comparatively recent example was the bombing of the London Underground. When you think of the background of the people, I think the people who were arrested were and who died as suicide bombers. I think I'm right in saying that each of them was born in England. Each of them was a graduate in England, and it wasn't as if you can say, oh well, you know, they've suffered so much in the Middle East, or they've been starved, or they've been landless, or they've been deprived over in Syria or over in some other area in the Middle East. They're not. They were second generation people who'd grown up in a community which seemed to have adopted them, but in fact it just didn't work, and they became, you know, profoundly alienated. So if you think of the, I just give you a short list, and you'll be glad to know I'm mercifully not going to attempt to deal with all of them, but if you think of the current wicked problems, I could think of, say, terrorism and security issues, the clash of civilizations updated, the question in politics of whether we adopt the process of retail politics or not. In other words, that you adopt a policy not because you think it's right, but you adopt a policy because you think it can sell. You think it's a winner. May not be right, but if it can win, well, that's a justification. The whole business of the attack on scientific method and the relative weight given to evidence versus opinion. You see, you say, well, you may have evidence, but I have strong opinions. And those strong opinions can predominate the way in which people, cast their votes. If you haven't already seen it, you ought to look at that remarkable book, the name of which I've just forgotten for the minute, but a number of you will know, the Daniel Kahneman book. You know, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for, although he's not an economist, he won the Nobel Prize for economics. But Kahneman's really making the point at which is arguing how comparatively unimportant evidence is when you're really making up a decision as to whether you want to go in this direction, whether it's buying a car or moving to a new area or something like that, that evidence really hardly comes into it at all. You simply say, well, I feel comfortable with this point of view. It's not particularly based on any evidentiary basis, but it makes me feel, it has a compelling sense. It makes me feel satisfied that I'm doing what I'm happy with. and often that will have absolutely nothing to do with any kind of evidence. If somebody looks it up on the, but they'll find the name of the Daniel Kahneman book, but it's very easy to find. Every bookshop's got it. But it's just a terrific book. And I feel abject at the age of 82. I've forgotten just for the minute what I didn't think I was going to be talking about it. The question about whether the media should have its emphasis on information or on entertainment, and to what extent the whole vision that people have, their understanding of the nature of the world, is mediated by the emphasis, or two things, on selling product or on simply entertainment. Say, for heaven's sake, if we keep going on and on and on with more and more detail, they simply switch off and we'll lose them. The climate change paralysis, because you say, well, if we act in a particular way, say, to try and have a bit of remediation on the issue of climate change, you think, well, think of all the economic disadvantages we might have. Think what impact it might have on the cost of living. Think of what it might have. Think of the social, think of the votes that might be lost. Think of the media campaign that can be generated against it. So the result is that you then move into a state of paralysis, because you say, well, we can't really have a rational debate about it, because if we had a rational debate about it, we would simply lose the great mass of people out there in the voterland. So this then follows, of course, the dumbing down of political debate, because increasingly politicians say people will vote because they want to feel comfortable with an outcome, and the last thing they want, this is the assumption, the last thing they want is to have a long-term serious debate on an issue where they have no empathy. I mean, the classic failure there, of course, has been on the whole issue of refugees, asylum seekers, to say, look, there's not a vote in it. It's a certain election loser if you do anything humane or decent about it. So just keep away, and then really campaign on the basis of saying, look, we're better than the other mob, a bit, a bit. And if we get in, we might modify things a bit, not very much, but just a little bit. So you have this policy abyss. The other thing that is also a kind of a wicked problem is that if you look at the structure of the political parties at the moment, you find something that's very radically different from the world of politics that I went into, or indeed the world of politics that Lynn went into a generation later. If you go back to the period that where I became very active in politics, from the 1950s on, you could see that there were a whole suite of issues, say, like the White Australia policy, like affirmative action. You could see the whole question of Aborigines and Aboriginal land rights and so on. The question of an independent foreign policy. For a lot of people, of course, it was the Vietnam War. For a lot of people, it was the death penalty. Was one of those critical issues that made people engage in political action, because they wanted to transform the world. The difficulty now is that the way in which, and South Australia, if I may be so brutal, is a good example of and I make an exemption in the case of Jay Weatherall, the Premier, who seems to be, I think, something of an anomaly. That once upon a time, as they say in all good fairy stories, once upon a time, South Australia was remarkable because it had a significantly high proportion of people who were non-aligned to the two major factions. Mm. And if you think of people like Don Dunstan, of course, was a classic example, but also Neil Blewett. Mm. But you had a number of people, and of course, Mick Young was very, very important, but they were essentially, they had a state-based approach which was different from the, say, the line being taken in Sydney or the line being taken in Melbourne. And you'd have to say of other luminaries of the Labor Party, like Clyde Cameron, for example. A bit mysterious to know whether he was left or right or where he was. There was a kind of an authoritarian touch, but he was very, very independent. But what happened was, when the factions became nationally institutionalised, it meant that where South Australia had the highest percentage of people who had an independent point of view, it quite suddenly became the state where you had the smallest number of dissenting people. Although it's interesting that both Mike Rann and Jay Weatherall are in a somewhat anomalous situation. But there's no doubt that what's happened is that people now join political parties not because they're associated with a cause, because they have a passion for it, but because they see a job opportunity. Yeah. Now, in my role, my rather mysterious role as a professorial fellow at Melbourne University, I'm struck by the number of people who come along and say, look, I'd like to talk to you. I'm seriously contemplating a career in politics. And I say, oh, that's splendid. I said, do you have any strong views about anything? And they said, oh. Do you think, is that a precondition? You see, it's a bit like somebody said, look, I want to be a champion athlete. You say, well, in what form? You say, well, I haven't really thought it through, but something will come along. So the result is that you find people who go in because they say, well, look, I'll work my way up. I'll get a job in a union office or a parliamentary office. I'll be a staffer. I'll work my way up. First I'll go out and get the sandwiches, then I'll be promoted to getting the coffee, and then the time will come, you see, when they'll say, you're third on the list, and sooner or later you will get a nomination for a seat. And so you get a seat, then you become a minister, then you retire, then you become a lobbyist. And that's been increasingly now, this is the professionalisation of politics. And it means, though, that because the most important task for people involved in politics like this is to simply keep the show on the road, to keep maintaining the organism, as it were. It means that they've often lost the capacity to argue a case. And I didn't come here particularly to talk at great length about the Labor Party, but I just make the point. One of the tragedies, I think, for the Labor Party has been that, and I'm subject to be corrected if people think I'm wrong, I don't think the Labor Party has won, federally, I don't think the Labor Party has won a single contested issue since work choices in 2007. Not one. See, they did pretty well, say, over how they handled the GFC. But all anyone remembers about that is the pink bats. They absolutely comprehensively lost the debate over that. They actually acted reasonably well in the end on the climate change thing, but totally failed to be able to sell it. And as a result, sort of backed away. I must say, in Shorten's credit, I thought what's been announced today, I mean, the normal fashion is to be leaked, but anyway, what's been announced today sounds quite courageous, and we'll see what happens at the national conference at the end of the week. But we've got, and then the other thing that, but I still haven't finished with the wicked problems. Something worth coming in that and I'll talk about it a bit tonight at this meeting, at the this other meeting that I'm talking to, that